Good evening and welcome to the African Football Podcast. Myself, Kwame, Ghanaian writer, broadcaster, journalist, podcaster, and entrepreneur. And in this edition of the African Football Podcast, African teams are out of the World Cup. So we're going to have a review, obviously, of the last two teams that were in the tournament, and then also give our view or give our take rather as to how well we believe the African nation did in this World Cup. And so before we get into the show, if you like what you hear, please share to your friends, your family, your social media networks. Subscribe to Ghana African Focus on YouTube. Hit the notification bell, meaning that every time we upload a new podcast, YouTube will notify you. Similarly, we're on Spotify. Look out for Ghana Africa in Focus on Spotify. Hit the follow button, meaning that Spotify will notify you when we upload a new podcast on Spotify. And for that matter, we're also on all the main podcast providers. Just type in Ghana African Focus in search engine, and you should get the podcast. All right. And if you want to donate to the show to help us continue to bring some great content from Ghana and from the African continent, you can donate as little as $3 a month. You can do that either as a one-off payment or as a monthly subscription. So if you'd like to donate, I'll leave you the donate button, the link, and you can donate when you like to. All right, so let's get into the African Football Podcast, looking at the last two African teams that were in this week's round of games. So before or after we recorded last Saturday, which obviously was brought to you on Monday, Egypt had finished playing their last 16 knockout round against Argentina, and Egypt lost 3-2. Egypt were winning 2-0 with about 11 minutes to go when Argentina pulled one back, and then the last 10 minutes or so, Argentina somehow managed to score 2 goals and knock out Egypt by 3-2. Now, Egypt complained about the officiating, that it favored Argentina, and Egypt had a goal perfectly ruled out. Sorry, a perfect goal ruled out by the referee after a VAR check, and Egypt after the game complained about the refereeing and also how it was favoring Argentina. Now, if you recall, I did say before that no African team will ever win the World Cup because for me, it's fixed. Why is it? Because two things. Like I said, before the World Cup started, I did say to you that, no African team is seeded at the World Cup. So if an African team is to make it to the last stages, it's for their own good volition. Yeah. So no African team does it. That means that they're public in tough groups. And we also happened to Tunisia in a very, very tough group. And even Cape Verde, who were in a tough group, but still managed to qualify out of their own, skillful play. And also, because the World Cup is a multi-billion-dollar tournament, it generates billions for FIFA, yeah? It's not going to look too good on FIFA if an African team is in the final or even semi-final, because that puts away sponsors and whatever, marketing and advertising, yeah? And so, as this has transpired, it's always the big countries that make the last stages of the semi-finals of the World Cup. So right now, you've got France and Spain in one semi-final, and then you've got 4 other teams, England, Norway, which is 1-1 at halftime, and also Argentina are going to play Switzerland in the early hours of Sunday morning, vying for the 2 other semi-final slots. Yeah. So Egypt felt hard done by, and they've got it right to be, because like I said, the tournament, the whole thing's a fix. Yeah. So unfortunately, Egypt were not able to hold out for 11 minutes, and whether it was bad luck, whether it was the referee, or whether Egypt did not concentrate, Egypt allowed Argentina to come back into the game and win 3-2. again with like Senegal and Belgium, where Senegal were leading 2-0 into the last 5 minutes, they allowed Belgium to come back. So, Egypt will keep themselves. Egypt will keep themselves for allowing Argentina to come back. Yes, I know that there's bad refereeing decisions, but if you put your backs against the wall and do like a defensive masterclass, right, the same way Cape Verde have done throughout the tournament, yeah, and also the Congo did against England, then I think Egypt would have beaten Argentina. But as it goes, that was not the case. So Egypt were knocked out, and then a couple of days ago, Morocco were the only African team to make the quarterfinal. And I said before the tournament started that I predicted that at least Morocco and possibly Senegal could make the quarterfinals. And so my prediction was right, that Morocco at least made the quarterfinal. And they played France in that quarterfinal. And obviously, as we know, France beat Morocco 2-0 in that game, with goals coming from Kylian Mbappe and also Ousmane Dembele, who is the current Ballon d'Or winner. And so Morocco kind of found it difficult against the French. I don't know if they were in awe of the French, but it seemed to me they gave the French too much respect and didn't really attack France like you see Morocco do, particularly in the group games, where they attacked. Against Canada, particularly in the first half, they were all over the place. But somehow managed to win that game 3-0. But against France, you could say they didn't have much of a game plan. And then obviously they, Mbappe had a penalty saved in the first half. But after the second half, it was virtually all France, and France scored 2 goals, and you could never see Morocco coming back in that game. And so unfortunately, Morocco lost 2-0, and that has ended the Africa nations' chances in the World Cup. And so, as I mentioned, like I said, Morocco was the African team that went the furthest. Of all the African teams, of all the 9 African teams, they made the quarterfinal. And so, looking back at the tournament, particularly in its new format, where you've got 48 teams, meaning that 3 out of 4 teams are more likely to qualify. I think this format and how it transpired, I think, African nations did well. For the first time in World Cup history, 8 out of 9 African teams made it out of their group. Apart from Tunisia, and Tunisia were in a very tough group with the Netherlands, Japan, and Sweden. So it was always going to be a tough call for for Tunisia to get anything from the group, let alone even get a point. And so Tunisia were eliminated the group stages, and that had 9 other African teams in the last 16, and some went to round of 32. And so for me, all in all, Tunisia, Tunisia alone, I think it's been a very good tournament for African football, and it shows that African football is growing step by step, tournament by tournament. And I was impressed with Cape Verde, because they had a very tough group: Uruguay, Spain, and Saudi Arabia, and they played those teams very, very well. Holding the European champion Spain to 0-0 draw, joined with Uruguay, and also joined with Saudi Arabia, and coming out of the group. And also in the last 16, giving Argentina a big fright, by coming back twice and forcing the game into extra time. And so Cape Verde, for me, was a standout nation. Yes, even though Morocco went to a quarterfinal, but we expected Morocco to go, to go deep into the tournament because of the pedigree now. But I'll come back to Morocco later on. But for me, Cape Verde was the African team of the tournament in this World Cup, because they have no stars. Most of their players are not playing in the top 5 leagues in Europe, i.e. the English Premier League, French Ligue 1, the German Bundesliga, Italy Serie A, or Spain's La Liga. Yeah, none of their team playing those big leagues. Yeah, and so for them to play with the energy, the passion, the skill, the discipline, the organization that they did, really surprised a lot of African football pundits because, truth be said, no one gave a prayer of Cape Verde coming out of that group with Spain and Portugal and Saudi Arabia, yeah, let alone getting to the last 16 and nearly fighting Argentina. So Cape Verde, for me, was the African team of the tournament. Ghana got a lot of work to do. They're too defensive and haven't got a great forward line. Semenyo is somebody that needs service. And, if he doesn't get service, he's not going to be able to put the balls in for the strikers to hit the ball. And also, I didn't see much of Thomas Asante, the striker who plays for Coventry City. Obviously, we're going to see what he's like in the Prem this season because Coventry are in the Premiership this season that kicks off in August. So we'll see a lot more of Thomas Asante in the Premiership. But for me in this World Cup, he wasn't that effective. So Ghana have got a lot of work to do. And whoever manages Ghana needs to get, somebody that can, a decent striker. Because Ghana have not a decent striker since the days of Asamoah. I don't rate Jordan Ayew. I've never rated him as a striker. And so Ghana have got a lot of work to do if they're going to qualify for the next World Cup, let alone qualify for the next AFCON that's going to be held in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania in 2027. Egypt surpassed expectations. They got out of the group and they beat I can't remember who they beat, but obviously they won their last 16 game and lost to Argentina in round of 32. So again, Egypt, they created chances, they did well, but for me, they lack a cutting edge. You got an aging Mohamed Salah, this is probably his last World Cup, and then obviously Omar Mamouche really didn't fire and wasn't that impressive for me as he has been for Man City. And so again, Egypt are going, into a new era without Mohamed Salah, the talisman for so long. So are they going to rely on just Omar Mamouche, or are they going to find also another striker that can fill the shoes of Mohamed Salah? Big shoes at that, because Mohamed Salah has been a very, very good player for Egypt. So obviously Egypt are very, very well disciplined and organized, but just for me, like cutting edge. Cote d'Ivoire, again, they were seconds away from going into the last 32 when they allowed Norway to come back, because they were winning 2-1 in that tournament, in that game. And for me, they're letting two soft goals that, allowed Norway to beat them in the round of 16. Again, it's a young Ivory Coast team. They will learn from this experience, and let's hope they can, get a striker as well. Again, Ivory Coast need a striker. I'm impressed with Diamande and Ahmad on the wings, but they need a Drogba. They've not got a Drogba. They need to get someone that can hit the ball in the back of the net, because goals win matches. At the back, not too bad. So, but again, they lack that killer instinct. Yeah, Ahmad scored a great goal for me, one of the goals of the tournament. But again, Ivory Coast needs a striker. South Africa, just scraped out to the group stages and made the round of 16 where they lost to the host Canada. South Africa again lack a cutting edge. Defensively, they're not too bad under Hugo Bruce, but they lacked again, a cutting edge in the last third. Yeah, and obviously the goals that they scored in the tournament proved that. Again, with Algeria again lacked a cutting edge. They were fortunate to get out of the group by beating Jordan. They had to win that game to beat Jordan. But in the last 16 against Switzerland, that was a step too far for them. And so Algeria, we need to go back to the drawing board and, try and get some new players that they can compete in AFCON, and then hopefully they can qualify for the World Cup in 2030. But one of the talisman, Murad Mahrez, has retired, and so he's been a great servant for Algeria. So Algeria will be looking to see how they can make that transition without Riyad Mahrez. Okay. We've talked Cape Verde, we've talked Ghana, we've talked Ivory Coast, we've talked South Africa, we've talked Algeria, we've talked Tunisia. So the last two, basically, Senegal. Senegal, again, will kick themselves. This was a team that had all the ammunition, and that could have gone at least quarterfinal. But for me, that game against Belgium, where they just, I don't know what it was, lack of concentration or complacency. You are 5 minutes away from beating Belgium and being in the last 32. And you would have played USA to get to the quarterfinal. And USA ain't with that, as Belgium beat them 4-1. Yeah. I believe Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast would have beaten USA had they beaten Belgium in that last 16. So, sorry, Senegal. So Senegal will be very disappointed that they didn't make at least the quarterfinal, because you got this star team, Ismail Sarr, Diarra, Sadio Mane, obviously not at his prime, but still a useful player. You have obviously Edouard Mendy in goal. He's still got time. But obviously the back line is now aging. Koulibaly was exposed on a couple of occasions, particularly against Norway. And so, Senegal need to get a decent defender back line, and also need to, concentrate for 90 minutes. And that's where that daft comment from the Belgian manager came into place. I'm not going to repeat that, because for me, it's a bit insulting. But Senegal should have beat Belgium. They should never have allowed Belgium to come back and beat them. So Senegal would definitely kick themselves for not beating Belgium and probably beating USA and going on to the quarterfinal. And lastly, Morocco. So Morocco, second tournament in a row, have been the standard bearers for Africa at the World Cup. 4 years ago, they made the semi-final. And this time they made the quarterfinal, losing to France 2-0. France are a very, very good team. Basically, France is basically an African team. You take out Rabiot, all the players are African. Mbappe's got a Cameroon father. And then you got likes of Dembele, I think he's from Guinea. You got Tuameni, you got the keeper, Magnon, you got Ibrahim Konate, you got Jules Kounde, you got Upamecano, you got Olise, he's got a Nigerian father. All these African players play for France, yeah? That's basically Africa. But I'll come to that. Whoa, that's going to be actually my next theme. Why so many African players are playing for European teams when they're going to be playing for their mother teams, mother countries. That's going to be my last African football podcast for now, and that'll be next week. So the French team is basically not an African team, if you look at it in a different way. So Morocco were never going to beat the French, but Morocco showed again why the African standard bearers. They drew new with Brazil, could beat Brazil. They beat Scotland, and they showed their tenacity by coming from behind to beat Haiti. Haiti also impressed in this World Cup. Haiti from Central America did quite well. And so Morocco again in the last 16, disappointing first half, but came back and beat Canada 3-0, and then obviously lost to I think the last 16. Who did they play in the last 32 to get to quarters? I think they beat I can't remember, but obviously they won that game to make the quarterfinal. So Morocco has shown that they've got great depth and great talent, but I think also they missed Ismail Salibari, who was their top scorer. I think he scored 3 or 4 goals in the tournament. He was injured for the game against France, so I think they missed him. But Morocco has shown their pedigree, in this tournament by again making the quarterfinal. And the next World Cup in 4 years' time is going to be closely between Morocco, Portugal, and Spain. And so Morocco will obviously play games in their own backyard, just like Canada played in Canada, US playing US, etc. So, one would expect that if everything falls into shape, Morocco again are going to make it at least quarterfinal 4 years' time. And, every African nation should be looking to see how Morocco have been able to do that within 10 years. Being able to, invest in football technology, in AstroTurf or grass technology, also sports science, build great infrastructure. This is this template that likes of Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, etc. This should be following in order to build, strong teams that can compete with your Germany, your France, your Netherlands, your Holland, your Belgium, your England, etc. And so Morocco, for me, has shown the template for how African teams can invest and prepare for, competitions like the World Cup. And so going forward, like I say in closing, I think it's been a very good World Cup for Africa. A lot of the teams performed very, very creditably, very, very well. And obviously, like I said, Morocco, as I predicted, were the African team that made it further by making the quarterfinal. And so going forward, I'm anticipating a very, very competitive AFCON 2027 with emerging teams like DR Congo did very, very well, 15 minutes away from beating England. Yeah, looking at Cape Verde, who for me have been the African team of the tournament of this World Cup. Looking at Ivory Coast, obviously looking at Morocco, but they didn't travel too well. So the AFCON 27, it bodes very, very well because what I've seen from this World Cup, I've been impressed. The African teams have been organized, disciplined, skillful, technical ability is good. And so all it just needs is to get the right, problem management in place, and also the right temperament to get Africa teams, not just to make, the round of 16, but to get into the round of 32 and then make even the quarters and semi-finals. Yeah, so it can be done like Morocco showed. So it's just going forward, African nations taking that next step by investing in their football federations, by investing in infrastructure, by investing in sports science, etc., to give their teams all the tools that they need to be successful at the highest level. And if we get rid of all this politics that's within our football federations, then I don't see no reason why 4 years' time, African teams can go deeper into the World Cup in 2030. And so in next week's African Football Podcast, we'll be asking why many Africans are playing for the likes of France, Spain, Germany, England, the Netherlands are not playing for their mother countries. And so thank you for listening to this edition of African Football Podcast with myself, Kwame, Ghanaian writer, broadcaster, journalist, podcaster, and entrepreneur. And again, please subscribe to the show. Subscribe to Ghana African Focus on YouTube. Subscribe to Ghana African Focus on Spotify. All right, and so until next week, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week for some more African Football Podcast.